Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We are really excited about this morning's webinar. For those that don't know me, my name is Angie Jones. I'm director of the Family Business Center. And today we have Kimberly England and John Wojciak, I hope I said that right, from Mission Next to talk to us about attracting and retaining veterans to your organization. So Mission Next is an organization that helps prepare transitioning service members for civilian work. And it also helps prepare organizations. It helps prepare their culture and their recruiting strategies to seek out and hire these veterans and maximize the value that they can bring to your organization. So I'm really excited. We know that finding good people and hiring good people is a challenge. This is a great population with a lot of leadership experience. And hopefully we're going to learn today how you can connect with that audience and bring them on into your organizations. So per our typical webinars, what we're going to do is everyone's on mute. We appreciate that. If you have any questions, please open your chat box. If you don't remember, if it's been a while since you've been on Zoom, if you hover down below, there's a little chat feature. You can click on that, ask any questions in the chat box. We will monitor that. We will be your voice. If there is a question that's a little more detailed that you would like to ask yourself, feel free to flag myself or Megan, and we will call on you when appropriate. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kimberly and John.
Great. Thank you so much, Angie and Megan and the Family Business Center. We're really excited to be here today to talk to you about this important topic about how you attract and retain veterans at your organization. So just by way of introduction, I'm Kimberly England, and I have a little over 25 years of consulting experience in human resources and business. And because I'm talking to my folks back in Toledo, I actually worked for Finley Davies for most of that career. And so I was a partner there in charge of the human capital group. So that's what we did: human resources consulting and employee communications, leadership coaching. So that was a pretty exciting time. And I know so many people in the community. I also do extensive work in the nonprofit area, helping boards, expand their skill set and improve their organizational efficiencies. So I'm going to let John introduce himself and so talk about how we got here to this topic and the research that we've done on it.
Yeah, so my name is John. I just recently retired from the U.S. Army after a 20-year active duty career last year. So I've been retired for about a year. And in preparation for my retirement, I wrapped up a doctoral dissertation that I've been working on for the prior 6 years. And the dissertation topic that I did a research project on, and Kimberly and I wrote the dissertation together, focused on hurdles hurdles that officers face when they leave active duty and get their first civilian jobs. And what we found was like so impactful. We actually spent time and wrote a book called Mission Next to help veterans transition from active duty. And then we started this consulting practice to kind of help drive that message home to veterans and to civilian organizations that are trying to hire them. So this is the product of a couple years worth of work and research, and there's like actual data behind all of this stuff that we're talking about.
So one more thing before we move on from my introduction, because John pointed out at the beginning that I'm proud to be a Toledo Rocket. He didn't get the little Rocky the Rocket in his thing, but University of Toledo is my home. So
yeah, I didn't get the rocket. So what's the problem that we want to solve? Each year, around almost 250,000 people leave active duty. So every single year, 200,000 people leave active duty. They find their first civilian job, and some service members have a smooth transition, and others just don't. With our practice, we talk to people on LinkedIn and a bunch of different social media feeds. We're finding that a lot of veterans are struggling to find some kind of traction, to find out where their next new home is going to be. And the Department of Defense spends a lot of money on veterans to hire them and bring them on and train them and do all of those things, but they don't really spend as much time and effort in helping them exit the military and find their first civilian jobs. In fact, in 2014, the Government Accountability Office found that most of the programs that the Department of Defense was using to help veterans transition wasn't doing a great job. And when I say the programs that they're using, there's 85 different programs that are out there, and the Department of Labor is spending a lot of money that's going out into the system to try to help, but it's being spread out to 85 different programs, and they're just not being all that effective. So what spurred us to pick this topic for our dissertation was 65% of active duty veterans are going to leave their first civilian job in the first 24 months. When you factor out COVID, the COVID departures, SHRM thinks that the estimate for people leaving their jobs after being onboarded, you're looking at like a 19% turnover rate. So when you compare that to U.S. service members that are getting their first civilian jobs, they're leaving at a rate that far exceeds what the civilian turnover is looking like. So it's a significant issue. And secondly, Penn State University did a recent survey, a recent study about 2 years ago that found that 61% of veterans think that they're underemployed within the first 3 years of leaving active duty. So they're receiving less pay, they're receiving less opportunities at work, and they're just not doing the job that they think that they're capable of doing. So civilian businesses have these highly qualified people working in their organizations that are not performing to the level that that those businesses could see. So there's a staggering difference between what we're hearing and what is actually being applied. Civilian businesses tell us that they want to hire veterans. They want to bring veterans on board. They see the value in veterans. But when we talk to the veterans themselves who are getting these different positions, it's not really translating to them. There's a disconnect with civilian organizations saying that they want veterans, and their complete understanding of the skills that veterans have and how can I leverage these veterans and actually leverage their true talents to be able to maximize everything that they have. And, veterans bring with them a sense of duty, commitment, dedication, this sense of selfless service where if they believe in your mission, they believe in what your civilian organization is doing, they will work tirelessly and endlessly to help you succeed to get to where you need to go. So what we've been finding is that there are three essential things that are causing veterans to leave their first civilian job in the first 24 months. We found that if there's a cultural mismatch, veterans will be inclined to leave. If there is an unbalanced work-life situation, they'll be inclined to leave. And lastly, toxic leadership. The veterans that we speak with, if they don't believe in the leader, if they don't see the leader ascribing to the values that the organization says that they have, they'll just leave. And we talk about cultural mismatch. We're going to talk a little bit more about the cultural mismatch.
Yeah.
Kimberly's going to kind of lay out where the rest of this presentation is going to go.
Yeah, so today we want you to kind of walk away with three things. One is an understanding of what veterans can bring to your organization and what qualities they bring. We want you to understand some of the challenges that veterans will face as they transition to the workforce. And then most important, I think, just learning the steps that you can take as a business leader to create a veteran-informed culture, which allows the talent in your organization to thrive. So those are the three things that we want you to walk away with today. And, let's start here. So, business leaders are telling us that they want to hire veterans, but there's definitely a lack of understanding in the business community about what military service is all about. So some of it is kind of taking you through a military 101, and I'm going to let John do that part.
Yeah, so we talked about this cultural friction between the people working in the civilian organizations and the veterans themselves. And we talk about military 101 when we talk to civilian businesses. There's a disconnect between how veterans talk and how civilian organizations talk. And when we talk to HR leaders, an HR leader goes to a conference, about all of the HR terms and whatnot, and you kind of speak your own language. Veterans speak their own language too, and even veterans' language is confusing. So just the simple definition of what is a veteran, right? What is a veteran? As we were writing book 2, we discovered that the Department of Veterans Affairs actually publishes a 10-page booklet to explain to veterans and civilian businesses what a veteran is. right? And it's confusing. We have a couple of examples up here on the slide, but it's confusing for a couple of different reasons. State statutes have different definitions of what a veteran is for state benefits and state protections. Federal statutes have different definitions of what is a veteran for, like a VA disability coverage or to get a VA loan, that type of thing. And as a result, people that are leaving active duty and people that are actually in service, they don't even know if they qualify as a veteran. So when we talk to civilian organizations, the question that you want to ask people that are coming to you and that are working for you is, have you ever served in the U.S. Armed Forces? If you ask that question, have you ever served in the U.S. Armed Forces? You're going to actually find out who in your organization is a veteran, because some people just don't think they qualify. And again, we talked about this. Every organization has a core body of knowledge. When HR leaders go to conferences and you talk with another HR leader, you have your own language, and you can tell by the person that you're speaking with, if they get you, if they understand you, they're speaking your own language back. And what we've learned is when civilian organizations learn enough of the military language to be able to speak adequately back and forth, to understand core military terms, to understand military rank, and maybe even a little bit about how the military of life works and what it looks like, it's going to build bridges to enable the civilian organizations and the veterans to talk with each other better and reduce cultural friction. One of the first things that we talk about, and when we go to conferences, we will typically have people come up to us and say, hey, John, Kimberly, I don't understand the difference between an officer and an enlisted person. Why does this even mean anything? And when I say that, we did a presentation at the Annapolis Rotary Club, and it's the home of the Naval Academy. And we had somebody come up to us at the end of the presentation and say, I don't know the difference between an officer and enlisted, and I don't understand why it's really important. So we talk about enlisted personnel. These are the doers in the military. They get all the work done. They make up 80% of the active duty force. Commissioned officers are the leaders. These are your strategic thinkers. These are your senior level managers. Officers have to have a 4-year college degree in order to receive their commission. And 45% of officers, 45% of them have advanced degrees, right? They receive special training in leadership, and they can do amazing things when they end up in a senior management role in these civilian organizations. I just want to share this chart. Kimberly and I spent quite a decent amount of time putting this together to kind of show the significance of, when you hire different military personnel, what does this look like in your world? If you have a captain in the U.S. Army, they're going to be in charge of between 150 and 190 employees. Now, as an HR leader or a business leader, how many employees do you have in your organization, and what level of talent do you think it takes to be able to manage 150 or 190 people? It's significant. So captains in the U.S. military, they make up about 5.7% of the military. These are your managers and directors. When you get to somebody at the rank of colonel, you can see that they only represent 0.8% of the active duty population. They outrank 99% of the people that are there. These are your CEOs, CFOs, and COOs. Why should you hire veterans? Veterans are quick learners. A couple of months ago, during the COVID crisis, the Pennsylvania National Guard and the Maryland National Guard did this ad hoc COVID clinic at a small town here in Maryland with the Hispanic speaking population. It was 90% Hispanic speaking. And these people, so the Pennsylvania Guard and the Maryland Guard, they'd never worked together. They never created anything like this. But they absorbed the information, right? They came to a civilian organization. They built this COVID clinic. They interacted. They had this medical triage system where they could onboard people and do medical tracking and get them the COVID testing they needed. They built teams quickly and efficiently. And then they used all of that information to be able to drive towards this strategic success. And they did it in the amount of hours, these two different organizations that have never worked together, because they have this common bond, this common training. Very, very quick learners. They have incredibly strong work ethics as well. Veterans are on the leading edge of how they approach change and change management. They're effective in managing organizational cultures to manage to success. And they work really hard. They work diligently. And typically, if you can get a veteran that on your team and they believe in your mission, they're gonna work incredibly hard to drive you to success. In particular, veterans that have security clearances, these are people that have received significant levels of vetting to be able to cross that threshold. Veterans are accountable, and veterans hold each other accountable. When you have a sergeant that receives a mission in training, they receive the task, they receive the mission, they will build out this training platform and train their subordinates to a certain level to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do for their job. And they're holding their subordinates accountable, because if their subordinates are not good at doing their job when they go overseas to do a mission, right, or if they go onto an aircraft carrier to do a mission, people can be seriously impacted if the service members aren't doing their job to standard. So there's this level of accountability where the service members are holding themselves accountable and they're holding their subordinates accountable. And it's just the way of life. It's just the way they do things. You don't have to train veterans on how to do that. Veterans are mission oriented. If you give them a mission and a task, they will do it. If there's a lack of information that where a manager, is really busy and is not able to fully define the task or fully explain, how they think this thing should be done, a veteran will be able to receive that task and follow through with the mission and fill in all those different bits and pieces to make sure that this happens. One of the individuals we consulted with, it was a major that recently transitioned off of active duty, working in a teaching environment that teaches for doctors, right? So doctors getting their MD and DO, and he was required to do this 2-week training program to be able to get them this certain level of certification. And he would go into his briefings with his other teammates and say, we're up and ready, and yes, I'll be able to be ready on the at the end of the 2-week period. And his subordinates were upset with him because he wasn't nervous, he wasn't worried, he wasn't upset that, oh, I'm not going to be able to get all these things done. And his boss pulled him aside and said, look, I'm kind of worried that you're not putting enough effort into this. And he said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you're not like worried or excited or nervous about this thing being done on time. And he said, look, I did the same thing, the same training platform I'm doing now in Afghanistan, where like stuff was going on like crazy, and we were going to take that training package and actually be treating people in the field in 14 days. So I've done this already, and I've done it in a time compressed environment. And I'm just not really going to get worked up about it, right? So veterans have a tendency to just kind of drive towards success without having the same level of anxiety. Lastly, I want to talk about the enhanced leadership skills that veterans receive. When we talk to HR leaders, they know when we get a veteran, these veterans are coming to us with leadership skills. And it's pretty incredible what veterans go through as they go through different stages of their career. When you talk about, in particular, military officers, to go from the rank of Army captain to Army major, you have to go through a leadership course. And it's not just a 2-week course. These courses take weeks or months to accomplish. And in addition to their tactical training, there's all of this leadership training that they have to go through. How do I lead people? How do I manage teams? And as they go through these leadership courses, they are constantly critiqued. When you were doing this particular task, you could have done these 6 things better, and I want you to work on them the next time, right? These are skills, these leadership skills that civilian organizations are looking for, and they really want to have. And small and mid-sized businesses, they typically don't have the resources available to send people out to go to these different leadership trainings. To go from major to lieutenant colonel, the course is, if you do it in one chunk, it's a 10-month school, right? So you go to this 10-month leadership school where you learn how to be a lieutenant colonel, and you learn all the tactical things you need to know, but you're also learning the strategic leadership stuff, and they train it and they practice it, and they're constantly critiqued on it.
We're going to move on to talking about the challenges that transitioning service members face, and there's a few of them. And the reason that we cover this is because we want organizations to understand what's coming on the other end of what they're trying to hire, and maybe what they can support a veteran through. So I'm going to get to the point where we talk about what you can do in the organization, but let's just talk a little bit about what these challenges are. One of the things that somebody who is leaving active duty service will need to do is to define a new personal vision. So veterans are not the same people that they are when they joined the military. So if you joined at 18, you finished high school and you enlisted, and even if you just, you did your 6 years and you're done, John mentioned all the leadership training and, what experiences you might have. Maybe you have an overseas deployment. You are just not the same person you were at 18 or at 22 or whenever you joined the military. So there's the step that they need to go through where they take a deliberate preparation to define who they want to be and what kind of work they want to do. They need to build these support systems for accountability and advice. Those support systems before came from the military, and they're not going to be there for these transitioning service members anymore. So they need to figure out how to put them in place. One of the people that we interviewed for the dissertation just talked about how he had moved, 12 times in 20 years, and that he didn't want to do that anymore. And he knew from his new personal vision that that was something that was going to be important to him. It's not this constant desire to move, that he was going to pick a place and stay there and put in some roots. So Mission X actually goes through, our book actually goes through a values exercise where we're asking transitioning service members to say, all right, what are your new values? Which ones are important to you? And you get down to a top 5 list to say, these are the things I'm going to be looking for. And the reason this is important to you as a business leader is because you want your values to match theirs. And they don't have to match all 5, but a few of them they definitely should, because some of those they could get outside the workforce. But definitely, if you have a veteran that comes in with this awareness of who they want to be in this next phase, that will help. The book also has them go through an exercise where they're building a personal board of directors. Like I said, all of their support systems were in that active duty workforce, and they're about to lose those. So we're having transitioning service members create this board of directors, say, okay, who is going to be your mentor? Who are going to be your peer group? Who are your friends, your coaches? And let's take a deliberate approach to identifying those people and regularly meeting with them. So we kind of mentioned it before, the whole speaking military. Everyone around them spoke the same language. And if a civilian organization wants to be able to recruit that talent, then some recruiters are going to have to learn how to translate that military experience into skills for the civilian workforce. And a veteran might not be able to do that quite so clearly, and they might need some help for that. The other thing is that civilian pay and benefits package will be completely new concept. So you might have to spend a little more time walking them through the way pay and benefits work at your organization, where you wouldn't if you were just hiring somebody from another civilian organization. So let me give you an example of how to translate these skills. So what you're looking at here could be what a resume would look like for one position. This is a maintenance supervisor in the Air Force, and she was stationed at the air base in Italy. And these are the things that she talks about, right? That she maintained combat readiness, and she led 327 enlisted personnel, which, by the way, is a pretty large department, in the civilian workforce. And that she executed intense op tempo that had 9,100 flight hours without incident. And most civilian organizations will look at that and be like, okay, I don't understand how any of this applies to what we're doing. But this is what you might want to see. First, there's overseas service. So she succeeded in a job, and whatever her personal situation and family situation, while living abroad in a country surrounded by people who didn't speak her language, who didn't use her currency, and lived in a completely different culture. And she managed to succeed within that. All right, so that has points to it that isn't going to come through unless you try to, analyze this resume. This is my favorite, the high op tempo. So op tempo is operations tempo. It is the rate at which work gets done. So if you said that to any other service member that you were in an intense op tempo, they would know exactly what that means. But as a business leader, you might not know what that means, but that just means the intensity at which this group work. And you can imagine, because she's working at an air base, which means that they're getting her up at, 0500, 5 a.m. in the morning and making sure that she has the scheduled maintenance because these planes need to get off the ground. So you have to understand that would be precise attention to detail in this extremely intense environment. And then again, just to maintain combat readiness for 137 aircraft without incident would require exceptional skills in planning, logistics management, and then back to those leadership capabilities. So none of that comes through, and we're going to talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence reviewing resume, but none of that would come through and match your job description. But if you personally pulled this resume and started looking at these skills and sort of understand what some of these words meant, you could translate that to what it would be in the civilian organization. So I mentioned before about the gentleman who didn't want to move. So second to this cultural mismatch of the reason that service members are leaving within the first 24 months is this work-life balance issue. And, it's defined as an individual's prioritization of work, their social obligations, their family obligations. And the thing is that veterans have lived in this service world where they didn't necessarily have a choice about those things. They were told when to get up. They were told when to do their physical activity, right? Their day didn't end at 5 p.m. And so now they're put in a position where they get to choose those things. Like, what hobbies do I have? Where does physical fitness fit in? And they might have to measure where they want that work-life balance to be as they transition to the civilian world. And one of our goals in the book, just like there were exercises to help them with their personal vision, there are exercises in that book to help them identify what the elements are of work-life balance and then how some of those positions might fit in. So what we're trying to send to civilian organizations is, veterans who have prepared for this transition and know what they're looking for so that they don't turn immediately within the first 2 years, right? Because if you know what you're looking for and what type of organization you want to work for, that makes things a lot easier in the transition. All right, so let's get to this part that I'm sure you're all waiting is what do you do to prepare your civilian organization? The number one thing is to start gathering the data. And we talked about that a lot of veterans don't even identify under the word veteran. And so the question you're asking is, have you ever served in the US military? Because that broad question will tend to get more answers and you'll have it. But when we were doing the dissertation research, most organizations, if they track veterans, they do it on the way in, right? And they do it for reporting purposes, but then they lose track. So they don't know, it doesn't even get into their main HRIS system so they could pull up, okay, we have, 20 veterans that work here. The other thing that could happen is that you could have somebody who wasn't a veteran or wasn't in the armed services when you hired them, and then they join the National Guard or reserves, and you want to make sure that you know those kind of things too, because they'll fit into this veteran bucket that you're trying to form. You can certainly be creative about the whole data gathering process, linking it to, the U.S. Air Force's birthday. The U.S. Marine Corps always does a big thing on their birthday, Veterans Day, or, maybe the Army-Navy game, and have some fun around it and try to gather the data about who in your organization has ever served. All right, next on the list is defining your culture. And so you might be asking, well, why would I want to, take the time to define the culture? The ultimate goal is to be able to articulate what your culture is and to match that to some of the values that we talked about earlier that a veteran would bring to the organization. So how do you do that? You ask your current employees why they came to work here and what makes them stay. You actually create a cultural statement, so a written document to say, this is what our culture is about. But then you have to keep an open dialogue to make sure that you are living that culture. Find examples of successes where people actually make sure that they demonstrate that culture and those values, right? And then you celebrate those things. And above all, particularly because we talked about how toxic leadership and when veterans don't match with what their leaders' values are, you need to hold your leaders accountable to say, okay, this is what we said we were as a culture and we're not living that. And we need to make sure that we're living those things. So lots of people use the term veteran-friendly organization. The Society for Human Resource Management went one step further after their research and called it a veteran-informed culture. And they went as far as actually developing 3 points of what that means. So if you have a veteran-informed culture, it means that you develop and execute a plan for integrating veterans into the organization and that everyone in your organization knows about that plan. that you have mindful activities that support the strategy, and it says all phases of the employee life cycle. So not just when you onboard them, but what do we do for leadership development? What do we do for coaching? How do we get these people opportunities? What are they looking for? So continuing through the employee life cycle. And then you're providing solutions to address transitional issues. So I told you about some of the transitional issues that they're going to face, and I'm going to give you a little bit more tips about how you can address those. But again, that's what's defined as a veteran-informed culture. And if you want to do that, these are the leadership competencies, whether that's for your HR people or your department managers, but these are the things that you need to know and do in order to have a veteran-informed culture. So for instance, we talked about the basic military structure and culture, just a general understanding of that. What's the difference between enlisted and officer? The ability to translate the language. So like we talked about with that resume, right? What does it mean to have high op tempo? Coaching skills, so that when you're working with veterans who are facing transition, that you can identify that this is a transition issue, and we're going to coach you through that. Right. So all of those kind of skills are what you would need to develop to have a veteran-informed culture. So this is an important one in preparing your civilian organization. And we probably have a half dozen examples of these, but I'm going to walk you through one. So it's about looking at your job descriptions or the roles and the requirements that you have in order to help veterans qualify. Job descriptions are used to outline the responsibilities and qualifications of the job. Sometimes they're written, sometimes they're, in posting format. Certainly it's used during the hiring process to target the best candidates, and then it serves as the basis for interview questions. So it's a pretty important thing that you are, that you're writing something down describing the role that you want to hire, that you need at your organization. And there is now a number of organizations are using artificial intelligence and applicant tracking systems to screen. So you enter the data from your job description on one side, and then it takes a resume and it screens to see if this person's resume actually matches the qualifications of the job. And a lot of that is automated now. And so you can see why a job description would be so important, because you're going to eliminate people that you don't mean to if you don't get your description right. So the example that's up here is an IT coordinator. And the job description that was out there asked for experience working with Cisco Unified Call Manager and Cisco Unity Connections and Red Sky E911, right? So they were really specific software programs, and they wanted, years of experience working with them. So the problem here is that the Department of Defense won't necessarily use these specific Cisco products. Right. So you could potentially eliminate the cyber personnel that have been highly trained in a way that exceeds anything the civilian workforce goes through. And they wouldn't make it through your artificial intelligence screening because they would never have these particular software. And so then you start to look at it and you're like, well, do they need it, or could we get it through training? And my favorite here is that, so Red Sky E911, they offer a 4-hour training course that they promise would get you up to speed on their system. So if you came with any experience in doing emergency management or infrastructure, planning, then this course, right, would just get you up to speed on their software, which is what you need. So what we're proposing is, a little more broad job description, which in this case reads, hang on just a second. Okay. So, here it's IT coordinator, experience in using software and systems designed to support personnel in crisis management, emergency response, and critical infrastructure projection, right? Because those skills a service member would bring, right? They've got experience in emergency management. It's just using a different software system that the DoD provides, and I don't think you'd want to eliminate those. So that's just one example. Again, we probably have half dozen of these easy about ways to look at job descriptions so you're not automatically eliminating veterans. This one also had later in the job descriptions, this handle stressful situations while demonstrating strong decision-making skills. And I mean, that would be such an easy thing to prove as a service member. We talked about it before, the whole high op tempo thing. And so if that's an important element, and I'm sure it would be for this role, it would be for almost any IT coordinator, but certainly one who worked in emergency management response. But, that is the kind of thing that you want to put on your job description, because that is what a veteran would bring to your organization. How are we doing? Good. All right, so another thing is just to coach veterans in the language of the civilian workforce. And we get people to say, well, why do I have to spend time doing this? You know, isn't it their job to adjust to our language? And that is all true, right? But this is years worth of language that they've learned. And the reason that they learn the language is so they can speak efficiently and get things done quickly. And so they adopt their own language to do that. And then civilian employees often feel uncomfortable or alienated when veterans speak military, right? They don't understand the time thing and how it translates. So then they start to feel like uncomfortable with the whole situation. So this causes severe cultural friction, and civilian organizations can help them by, awareness of the language barriers, education for both the veteran and the civilian workforce, and just some self-reflection over, okay, when do I use these languages? How can I help this person transition? So these are a few great examples of that, the most common ones. And, the books, by the way, that are on the side, we're not recommending these. I just want you to understand that there are entire books out there to translate this language. So that's how prominent it is within the active duty military. But, one of my favorite is quarters. So if they would invite, or there would be a party at their quarters, that's their home, right? It's not something we would ever say in the civilian workforce. Or they use the word briefing. I mean, we would call that like a staff meeting. Chow is one of our favorite, though we still use it around here. The kids come to chow, but it just means a meal, right? Breakfast, lunch, or dinner. But all of that stuff tends to alienate people who are in the civilian workforce because they don't understand. Like, what does that mean? He just said it's at the meetings at his quarters, or we're having drinks at his quarters. I don't know what that is. And so you're trying to reduce this cultural friction, which is why it's important to kind of understand some of these languages. Also, if you're preparing your organization, one of the most effective things that we found in the research was to form a veterans affinity group. And, so it wasn't just our research. There's been plenty of other published research out there that show that veterans affinity groups increase retention. And in the interviews that we did to prepare the dissertation, everybody who had a veterans affinity group, all of the officers that had them at their organizations were planning on staying. I'm not saying that's the only solution. It was so impactful that said, okay, if I have a place to gather and form relationships with people who have my military experience, then that makes me more comfortable and will help me work through the transition areas, as a group. So those groups can be used to connect mentors, targeted professional development opportunities, but all sorts of things. And then we talked about data, gathering data. Business organizations can then use the people who are part of the veterans affinity group to be volunteers at job fairs to help translate those resumes, all sorts of stuff that they can be used for once they get in this group. So we definitely recommend that, when you're starting a veterans affinity group, that you put together a charter, which is a written document. And the Mission Next book has an example of one of these in the appendix, but essentially it's a mission statement, some organizational benefits, just some documentation for the group so that you know why they exist and what kind of activities they should be doing and what benefits the organizations are going to receive. Also just some structure. The military has a rigid structure, so any structure around leadership positions and who will be doing what, I think is all helpful to get these kind of groups started.
And so as Kimberly was talking about speaking the language and these military acronyms, we're consulting with a nonprofit right now to help them build out and expand their board of directors so they can kind of get to their mission next. Kimberly shows me an email that she received from the CEO of the organization and says, he's telling his people to have something done NLT. What's that mean? And I said, well, it's no later than. That's what that means. So what happens is that, you have these military leaders. Now he's running a nonprofit and he's talking to people on his board, his consultants, and there are these pauses, right, in communication where you have, he wants to get information out and he wants work to come in, but there's a pause where somebody has to go to somebody else and say, wait a minute, what did you mean? So it's this whole, as we get better, as we spend time on learning this language, it's going to make us we're going to be able to communicate a lot more effectively. We talk about effective communications. One of the things that doesn't come up when we do our consulting is outward discussions of post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that HR leaders are thinking about it. We know civilians in these organizations are thinking about it, and it's not really as pervasive as people think. Probably the most striking thing that we found in writing our second book, HR's Mission Next, is that the Department of Veterans Affairs actually went out and did a study to see, of these veterans that have PTSD, is it showing up in the workplace? And the results said that it's not. So veterans are no more likely to have a PTSD related event in the civilian workplace than civilians are. And mental health it's an actual issue in this country. And when you have somebody that shows up to work with a physical injury, they break their leg after they were shoveling their icy sidewalk, everybody in the organization can look at them and say, John, you have a broken leg. What can we do to help you? Mental health, mental health injuries are different, right? Because there's not an outward manifestation of this, but it does come up in the workplace sometimes. In 2021, 30% of the EEOC cases that were filed dealt with mental health related issues, and over the past decade, there's been a 20% increase in EEOC filings that deal with mental health issues. And when we know that 1 out of every 5 people in the United States actually experiences a mental health illness related issue, shouldn't HR leaders and businesses just start developing their own plans on how to deal with holistic mental health in the organization, not just for people, veterans that might have PTSD, but the civilians in their organizations that might have PTSD as well. Final thoughts. We said we'd give a presentation in 45 minutes, and we're probably 3 minutes shy, so it's a good time to wrap things up. Learning the language, understanding the language, reduces cultural friction, and it makes it a lot easier to create a veterans-informed culture. You can do this by maximizing talent within your own organization. One of the best ways to do that is to look at your own data. Who in your organization who do you have that's in your organization that is a veteran, and leverage them to help you bring more veterans in. Veterans affinity groups are a fantastic way to build these. So gather the data, that's important. The job description thing has been really striking for us as we were researching for our second book for HR leaders. It's small and mid-sized businesses. If you don't have job descriptions that are looking for skills as opposed to these particular certifications and 3 years of experience with this particular software, you're going to miss out on all of these talented veterans. They're going to get sucked up by larger companies like Amazon and FedEx and UPS, and the small and mid-sized businesses, you're just not going to get them because your job descriptions are not pulling them in, and they're not going to make it through your applicant tracking system. So I'm going to go ahead and let Kimberly put up the last slide. It's pretty exciting for us here. So
certainly this is our contact information if you want to connect, and we encourage you to join us on LinkedIn. Mission Next Consulting has our own page. But the exciting part is that, so we mentioned a couple of times that we've been working on our second book to help HR and business leaders recruit and retain veterans. And so this is the draft of our cover design that we just got Friday, I think. So This group is the first to see it. HR's Mission Next, and it goes through a lot of the content, gives a lot more examples, and has some other really good information in there. So we're super excited that it should be ready in the next few weeks, but you guys are the first to see it. So Angie, I'm going to turn it back over to you for questions and whatever else you have.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One, the cover's great. It's very fun. I love it. I'm glad you brought up PTSD, because I did receive a private question about that, hoping that you would cover that. And I see there's a comment in the comment box about that either. I'll just read it. I find that suicide of veterans was something I had to really observe for warning signs, and I had to pay attention to veterans if their friends had issues, and I have resources ready if needed. I was also really impressed by the leadership of officers we hired. So thank you for your comment with that. One question is, are there services out there, or is it the government that can help place these veterans, or where HR companies, if they want to actively go out and hire a veteran, is there a place where they can go?
So that's like the number one question we get. It is the one question that I anticipate is it's the, how do I find veterans? I wanted this to be, when we were doing the research for the second book, I wanted this to be such a simple answer, right? I wanted to say, okay, here's a table of like the 6 job boards that you can join. It's really disjointed. But it's important to know, so every state has an agency that is sometimes called the Department of Veterans Affairs. Sometimes it's under the Military Veterans Affairs Association. It's called slightly the same. Sometimes it's under the Department of Labor, but every state has one of those, right? That's government funded, and their sole job is to connect employers to veterans and to help those civilian organizations hire them. So like if you're going to start somewhere, that is certainly the best place to start. You want to talk about the recruiting?
Yeah. So if you go to your web browser and you type your state, so if you're in Ohio Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, it'll pull up a name and a phone number. You call that phone number. There's a transition assistance person there that is going to be able to help you. Each state is going to be able to do that. Next, if you have a job that you're trying to post, LinkedIn is an amazing resource. And actually we have a whole chapter in this book, HR's Mission Next, on how to find these veterans. But there are groups on LinkedIn that have 140,000 followers who are transitioning, right? So you could have people who are actively transitioning in your state that are looking for a job. You can post your job right on those websites on LinkedIn. And
there are headhunters,
yeah,
right? So there are headhunters that are specifically targeting, even military officers, junior military officers, all sorts of targeting. So there are probably a half dozen that are out there. And if you just search, military headhunters, you'll find them. So if you had a position and you were specifically looking for, a military officer or somebody to fill that, you could always go, it's just the fee structure. I'm sure you guys all know how headhunters work, but there are fees there and all of that stuff. But if you're targeting that could be a good way to go. So.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I saw someone also posted in the chat, they use Orion Recruiting on the West Coast. So it's another resource. Okay, in your research, why, or have you kind of discovered why companies don't go out and actively seek to hire veterans, given all the leadership and experience they bring and all the value?
It's a resources issue. When you talk about small and mid-sized businesses, they just don't have if you gave them a full-time HR person, right, what full-time equivalent, and said, look, you can, we just want you to bring military people in, that's wonderful, but that takes a full-time equivalent to be able to do that. What we typically see in small and mid-sized businesses, these are other job duties that are assigned to HR. And there's a lot of work, as Kimberly was talking about. There's no one place that you can go and just find veterans. It's disjointed. All the states are a little bit different in how they operate their departments of military and veterans affairs. And we have other organizations. I talked earlier about the Department of Labor and how they have all these 85 organizations that are out there. We have Hire Our Heroes and the Wounded Warriors Foundation and the American Legion and VFW. Each one of these organizations has branches to help veterans transition and find them jobs, which means as an HR leader, you have 10 or 15 or 20 different places that you can go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the large organizations like, Amazon, Lockheed Martin, they have full-time, multiple positions that are doing military recruiting. But in a small or mid-sized organization, it's just difficult to find those kind of resources. So.
Okay. Great. Well, that's all the questions that we had. And is it okay if we share your presentation, if you don't mind kind of sending that to me and we can send it out to the group? Is that okay with you?
Sure. Yeah, that would be just fine.
Okay, wonderful. So if you could email that to me, we will send that out to the attendees and those that were registered and weren't able to attend. And we will also, we did record the session, so we will send out the link. We'll have it posted to YouTube either today or tomorrow. So feel free to share that with your HR departments or with your affinity groups or with any colleague or anyone that you think could benefit from this presentation. And we appreciate you both getting up early and joining us and sharing all this valuable information.
Yeah, thanks you so much, and go Rockets.
Yes, thank you. Go Rockets. All right, everyone have a great day.
Thanks a lot.